Hello, today is November 18th, 1998. I'm Ron, and I've been asked if I knew anything about the Bill of Rights. Well, I know a few things about the Bill of Rights, and in order to be able to talk to you about them today, I'm going to relay them to you, at least what I do know, through my own personal experience, having lived through what I'm about to tell you. It is important in this country that people respect the rights of all. But also it's important that we all realize that we must assert our rights under the Bill of Rights, or we waive them. We don't have them, even though they exist. I found through the legal process that I was forced into by various prosecutors that I had to come to know those rights real well, because I had up to that time assumed that they knew them and that they would be enforcing those rights. Well, you must enforce those rights. As a matter of fact, I found that they hardly know them, and very seldom do they even consider complying once you've declared those. And so you really don't have much chance of success in what they call, and I quote, the criminal process, unless you know the Bill of Rights and how to assert your rights. Well, through the process of evolution, I went through the school of hard knocks and learned, to the best of my ability, leastwise, how to enforce my rights under the Bill of Rights. Remember, our forefathers didn't always have that Bill of Rights. And it become unbearable for them in this country, being treated as subjects of the crown in England. And so I'd like to start out by saying that there was a Declaration of Rights made by our forefathers. And I'd like you to pay attention to this, even though I'm going to read it, because it is the basis of the Bill of Rights. And the Declaration of Rights was in Congress at Philadelphia, October 4, 1974. And here was the problem at the time. Now, we've heard the old adage, what goes around comes around. Also, that history repeats itself. Well, pay attention, you might see history repeating itself. The British Parliament claiming a power of right to bind the people of America by statute. In all cases whatsoever, hath in some acts expressly imposed taxes on them, and in others under various pretenses, but in fact for the purpose of raising a revenue, hath imposed rates and duties payable in these colonies, established a board of commissioners with unconstitutional powers, and extended the jurisdiction of the courts of admiralty, not only for the collecting of said duties, but for the trial of causes merely arising within the body of a county. And whereas in consequence of other statutes, judges who before held estates at will in their offices have been made dependent on the crown alone for their salaries, and standing armies kept in times of peace. That's the problem that led to the Bill of Rights in this country. And of course they addressed it. And they put their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the line to bring forth that Bill of Rights. Now, the very least we all can do is assert our own rights. I guess I've been through all of the Bill of Rights in one way or another, and in one proceeding after another. They're very easy to understand. If this were to be most of what you know of the law, you would fare quite well as long as you don't pick up a pen and sign them away or testify them away. It's not your obligation to testify those away. So I'm visiting with you today pursuant to the First Amendment, or abridging the freedom of speech. In other words, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Now that's what it says in the First Amendment, and I'm exercising it. I don't intend to teach you law, and I don't intend to practice law. But I am going to relate to you the personal experiences, at least some of which I encountered learning the Bill of Rights for myself and using them in process. Now, due process of law is very important. And there's much to do, even in the legal process today, about giving the appearance of due process of law. Now, I didn't say giving due process of law. I said giving the appearance of due process of law. Unless you know what due process of law is, any appearance you may believe is due process of law. Appearance is quite different from the real thing. You see, Congress saw fit way back then to bind the public officials to the chains of the Constitution by an oath of office, wherein they must solemnly take that oath that they will uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. And perjury of oath is a very serious offense. And you must see to it that no government official, whether he be a judge or whether he be a prosecutor, violate those constitutional rights. But you must see to it, you must place it upon the record. This is a paper system. The process, shall we call it criminal process, is also a paper system, covered by documents, things on documents, things under affidavits, and also testimony under oath. All of that is important. You cannot assume that evidence is going to be presented in your behalf. You must present it. You must see to it it gets presented. Otherwise, your side of the events, or at least alleged events, will not be told. I'll start by saying one day I had visitors at the farm. These folks come in disguise. They were there to steal. That was the real effort. They were backed, by those in camouflage uniforms carrying machine guns. These people were witnessed by my wife, my 3 children, my mother, my aunt, a fellow who said he was a reporter for the National Enquirer, and a friend and his wife that happened to be there at the time, and an old insurance friend that happened to come upon the scene. I asked the individuals that were there why they had come, and I asked them to produce the necessary paperwork, because I already knew that in order to be there they had to have a court order, actually signed by a judge. I knew that they had to have a writ of execution, which had at least had to have been served upon me 10 days prior to the taking of what they come to take. They had served none. I knew that. And I asked them for it. Asked them for the court order, asked them for the writ of execution. They didn't have any. Well, I could see they had enough guns and enough manpower to take whatever they wanted, so I asked them to produce a bond covering twice the value of what it was they were going to take. And they didn't have one. Well, I said, get it. Get it. We're not going nowhere. We're here. We're just watching. Get it. This is the middle of the afternoon. You got plenty of time. Go get it. Send one of you to go get it, or call somebody and have them come. Well, they stood around, didn't know exactly what to do. And so I asked my wife to go to the phone and call the courthouse to see if these documents existed, any of them. Well, she went to the telephone, but they had already disconnected that for that purpose. And so she was unable to call the courthouse. And I give them a time element, saying that they were standing around to get it. And I give them 3 warnings over a period of time. And I said, now gentlemen, you've produced nothing to justify your existence on this property. Do you have a warrant? Well, they didn't have that either. So they would have a right to be there if they indeed had a warrant supported by oath and affirmation that I had committed some crime. No. I believed I hadn't committed any crime, and they didn't have a warrant. So I said, gentlemen, I have no choice. You're here unlawfully. I must place you all under citizen's arrest. Well, that was something I had to do as a citizen, enforcing my constitutional rights. They've done violated them all. And if I don't stand up for them, they certainly weren't going there. They were there to steal. Well, shortly thereafter, and by the way, I made no assault on any of them. I never even tongue-lashed them out. I just merely asked for the paperwork. And by the way, you never want to aggressively move against any person who perceives, or that you perceive as an official. It isn't worth it. And that would be creating an incident. They're going to do what they want to do. You don't have to cooperate. You can stand mute. You don't have to give them what they want. If they're going to steal, make them take it. Well, they decided then that they'd better jump a bunch of us. And I got jumped from behind, taken to the ground, and you know, I still have the scars from You know, once you get your skull cracked pretty good, that stays there for life thereafter once it heals up. And remember now, a crime had been committed. Well, it is the system's pattern when a crime is committed to charge somebody with that crime. Well, they chose to charge the victims, this victim. That's one of the things you need to watch for, because it is their normal process. When there's a crime committed, even though they're committing it, somebody's got to be charged for it. And so, oftentimes, they'll charge the victim. Yeah, it surprises you, doesn't it? And I was hauled off, dragged away. As I recall, I was either conscious or semi-conscious. I can't remember much about it, other than I thought I was in a car that was going terribly fast. And then I remember coming to and laying on cement, which ended up being county jail. Incidentally, I was charged with obstructing a governmental function, a crime. Huh. Well, that went to court before a judge. And the judge took a look at this and determined that what I did do was lawful. Yeah. Because it is lawful to obstruct an unlawful governmental function. Now that's what I was charged with, was obstructing one. But it is lawful to obstruct an unlawful governmental function. All I asked for was the paperwork. They didn't have it. As a matter of fact, there wasn't a cover-up court order until several days after the taking. Actually, it was in the next month that finally, after the judge made 4 attempts to do one correctly for the criminals, did he sign the last one and attempted to backdate it to try to cover up their crime. Anyway, it was a bad scene for my family and friends, and it was a bad scene for the government officials. Because a couple of days after they committed that theft, they lost their insurance, and all of those officials are required to be bonded by a third-party insurer, at least in those days. They lost their insurance because the insurance company could see that the way they were behaving would lead to tremendous liability on the part of the insurer. And of course, insurance companies, there's one thing they don't like, and that is potential liability laying in their files. You see, they like to collect premiums. They're in the business of collecting premiums, not paying claims. And these claims could be astronomical. My wife was beaten in that affair, and she was already crippled and on a walker. You hear me? So were my children, and my mother, and my aunt. I mean, we're dealing with people that aren't all there. They're hired because they meet a certain criteria. Are you hearing me? They're hired because they meet a certain criteria. They will go and do anything they're told to do. Anything they're told to do. Now, you might find an exception to that rule, but there aren't many of them that are exceptions to that rule. And so that's kind of what you're up against. But you have no choice but to stand up for your constitutional rights, because your forefathers gave everything for them. And the very least you can do is stand up for them. You see, what they were there on was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secured in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. See? Shall not be violated, it says. And no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation. Now also, it must state on that paperwork, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. Now all they had to have was the paperwork. That's all they had to have. And they could have done it lawfully. And believe you me, had they had the paperwork, there would have been nothing I could have done there at that time but watch, take pictures, take notes of what they did. Yeah. That's all I could have done, was watched and tried to document what was done. So I could go to court and attempt to correct the wrong. Yeah. You see, there was secret process conducted within the court. Well, if you're accustomed to breaking the law, why not stop there? You might just as well go through and make the whole system legitimize it. And that's what they've been doing. Most people do not stand up for Constitutional Bill of Rights 1. Most people don't. Why? They just want to get the controversy over there and get out of there and forget it. Well, there's one thing about those things, and that is you never forget them. And so quickness is not important. Standing up for your rights is. And of course, when you do, you can expect somebody to take out a big, wide, black brush with black paint on it and just shellac you with it. Make you the bad person. But that's part of it too. Kind of need to know that. I've had more bad press than most people. And I got it just wanting to stand up for my rights. That's part of the price. Nevertheless, I have done everything within my power to uphold those. Due process of law. Those of you viewing this need to take one afternoon off and go to the courtroom, whether it be a municipal court, a county court, or a district court, depending on where you live. And go and see and watch what's going on. You can liken those court processes to a sheep shearing contest. Have you ever watched the man with the clipper handling the sheep and just defleecing? You know, some of them even have contests to see how fast you can fleece somebody. And you'll see the cash register rings every few minutes. Why? Well, for the purpose of raising a revenue. We have all kinds of statutes. And why are they there? For the purpose of raising a revenue. Money. Money. We recently have been set upon by another, at least alleged another, 100,000 policemen. Their job out there is to raise enough revenue to cover the costs of their existence and the expenses. And most of them will do whatever it takes to accomplish that. And believe you me, there are lots of unconstitutional statutes. North Dakota, now this number may not be correct, but it'll be close. 80% of the statutes passed by the North Dakota legislature and signed into law by the governor to a constitutionalist are deemed to be unconstitutional. Well, then how do they get away with those? Because all of the legislators swore to uphold the Constitution. They all took the oath of office. So how do they get away with that? Well, they get you convinced to contract. Are you hearing me? They get you to contract. When you contract, a certain set of statutes apply to that contract. And you will be processed not in a court of constitutional law, but in what? They said it well in here. Court of Admiralty, contract law, international law, the law of contract. You can put all kinds of terms to it. Means the same thing. And you'll know whether you're in a contract court or not by looking at the flag on the wall or on the stand. If it's got gold braid around that flag, you are walking into an Admiralty maritime jurisdiction. Contract. You're there by contract. And so statutes apply. But remember, there is still the supreme law of the land. Many, many years ago, a friend of mine, who I deemed to be a real patriot and would have fit in well during this time in our history, he would have been one of them, told me, he said, "Ron, you really don't understand." He said, "But I'll explain it to you the best way I can. Criminal jurisdiction, when there is no injured party, when there is no injured party, is a contract jurisdiction. So criminal is contract." I couldn't hardly believe that, not even reading this. Well, I'll tell you this, he's way more right than wrong. Way more. A number of years ago, I believe it was 85, 86, right in there, a report came out in the judicial system in North Dakota, and it was put out by the North Dakota State University, and it gave the judicial system high marks in the state. Well, those of us that read it looked around and said, well, gee, it must be just us. Must be just us that don't understand something or don't believe this. Well, you see, right here in this Declaration of Rights, it cites what the problem was. And judges who before held estates at will in their offices have been made dependent upon the Crown alone for their salaries. Who's paying the judges? You can be as fair-minded a human being as comes, and you're still partial to where the money comes from. You see, prior to this problem in this country, if you had a controversy with somebody, you got together and selected a mediator who was called a judge, and each of you paid half of his fee to mediate the dispute. So you see, he wasn't beholden to either party. His job was to mediate the dispute and to come to what is called justice. Well, that doesn't happen. And it don't happen today, and it didn't happen then. The judges are paid by the state. I have a list of their salaries. They're tremendous. The benefits are tremendous. And their decisions are one-sided. It really exists. So we farmers decided we were going to do our own studies. So various ones went to various courthouses and started looking through cases. And here's what we came up with. And it's going to shock you now, so be ready. If you got a pencil, you should write these down. Government is the largest winner in the courtroom, by far. Large corporations are the next largest winner in the courtroom. And they exist as a creation of the state. And then there's we people. How do we fare in the court system? Those of us who know nothing about the law, or presume to know nothing about the law, lose 98% of the time. Odds aren't good. You got a 2% chance of winning in the courtroom if you walk in there yourself and do the best you can yourself. Well, if you pay a lawyer and walk in with a lawyer, you will lose 97% of the time. There's only 1% difference between having no representation and having to pay through the nose for representation. Well, many people who get caught up in this contract criminal jurisdiction don't have the money to hire a lawyer. Well, the courts have a problem with jurisdiction. They must at least give the appearance of due process for there to be jurisdiction, and so they want you to contract for a public defender. Yeah, I've had public defenders. Yeah. And you know, once in a while, you can run across one that'll do something positive for you. Now you can. But one of the reasons for you to sign for an attorney in the first place is for the court to obtain the contract for the criminal jurisdiction. Now that's one of the ways. There is another way that I've found to get jurisdiction, and that's for you to go under oath and enter a plea. Criminal plea. Guilty or not guilty is the only two they want, although there are 7 different kinds of pleas that I've found. Courts are really they're trying to convince you they can only recognize guilty or not guilty. Well, gee, the problem is that you're whisked in there right quick on the arraignment without having the proper documentation first. You see, if you're going to enter a plea, you got to be sure you enter one correctly. And in lieu of entering one correctly, everyone pleads not guilty at first. Pretty much. Pretty much. And if they don't, the judge tries to enter a not guilty plea, tries to represent you, and enter a not guilty plea for you. Well, see, lots of stuff needs to happen before a plea. At least that's what I've found. One, I'm entitled to discovery under Rule 16 of the criminal laws. I want to know what it is they're saying. What have they got for paper? What have they got for proof? That's kind of important to know, you know. And then there's one other thing, you know, that I absolutely insist on. And that's a formal complaint, signed by someone who's authorized to practice law. Now, you know, that's called for in the civil rules. Remember now, until you enter a plea, there's probably not going to be a criminal jurisdiction. Civil rules. Well, I don't know if, you know, if I read the American English, like others or not, but here's what it says in Rule 11 of the Civil. If a pleading motion or other paper is not signed, it must be stricken unless it is signed properly after the omission is called to the attention of the pleader or movement. Well, that also infers one thing, besides the wordage that it says. And that is the person that signs it must be authorized to practice law in the state and authorized to represent the municipality, the municipal, the town, the county, or the state. Must be authorized. And the reason I want a formal complaint is I want to be sure I know the exact nature and cause of the offense. I mean, how can you prepare a defense without knowing the nature and cause? See, that's provided for in the 6th Amendment. And be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation. That is right there. Yeah. I want to know. Well, I have a right. So I demand it. I want a formal complaint. I know something that most people don't know, and that is there's very few prosecutors in this state that know how to do a formal complaint correctly. And so I like technical error. Yeah. Multiplicity and duplicity is what I find in most of the complaints. See, there can be multiple counts, but there can only be one nature and one cause per count. And when they include natures, plural, and causes, you can't defend. Why? Because every complaint's got to be done so that the defendant can defend before a jury. Because you see, the jury doesn't have the opportunity to maybe or to denote which section, which piece of that count did they find you innocent of or guilty of. They only have an off and on switch. Not guilty or guilty. And you have a right to know exactly what you've been found innocent of or guilty of. Exactly. And so if there's natures and causes per count, you can't defend, and that's a denial of due process of law, in my opinion. Remember, due process of law, not the appearance of due process of law, actual due process of law. And you got to know the difference. Because, boy, they put on a fabulous dog and pony show. Fabulous. And then discovery. Well, I don't care when I request discovery if they give me anything. But I'll tell you one thing, they ain't going to use it at trial. If they don't give it everything to you they got, make full disclosure to you what they've got prior to entering a plea, no plea can be entered. I mean, you should not. I do not. I want to know. I have a right to that discovery. I have a right to be informed of the nature and cause of the offense. All of the story. The rest of the story. All of the story. And I insist on it. Otherwise, I move to dismiss. Because I'm not going to go along with the appearance of due process. I insist on due process. So, and what they don't give me, well, I don't care about. Because I'm going to object to it at trial. You cannot use that at trial because you didn't provide it so many days ahead of trial. Yeah. So I didn't care. I know this, that I have those rights, and I've got to assert them myself. Now we'll go back to this public defender. I like to kid about that somewhat, and so I'm going to make that light. Remember, there are a few of them that have some ability and will assert some knowledge that you might not have on your behalf. But for the most part, I call them public pretenders. And there's a public defender agreement signed by the public defender, the judge, and the prosecution. I like to have a copy of that contract to see what it is this guy's supposed to, or this gal supposed to do. Well, you ought to see how some of them read. I'll tell you how some of them read, and I'll liken it to this. Have you ever been and seen a thrashing machine run? Like at Rolog, Minnesota, each fall they have the thrashers reunion, and you can go out there, and in the afternoon they always start up a thrashing machine, and there's bundle wagons there. You can go to New Rockford. I mean, they've got one too, and they do a good job of demonstrating that thrashing machine. And you'll notice I liken these public pretenders to those men standing on the bundle racks with the 3-tine pitchfork. It's their job to grab the bundle, which is you, put you on the apron heads first, so that you get fed in perfectly into that jurisdiction of the cylinder, that combine, or that thrashing machine. And the first thing that hits is the little knives that cut the string on the bundle and feed the cylinder evenly. But the heads go in first, and of course there's these teeth in that cylinder, you know, that just, I mean, that chops you up pretty good when you go through that process. And by the way of using air, they separate the chaff, and of course the walkers take the straw over the top. And the chaff and the straw, they're separated from the substance, liken the substance to the money. And that is elevated. That has gravity, more gravity, and that's elevated up and put in the truck for market. And most of the time, the person that has a public pretender, he ends up just getting blown in that pile of straw. You've been processed, though, and you've had the appearance of due process, but you haven't had due process in most cases. You know, I found by looking in behind the scenes, I mean, I like to check out everybody's credentials if I can. You know, is this policeman a licensed policeman? I like to check that out. Is he indeed licensed? Is he authorized to practice law in the state? No. What's he doing? Signing, moving court documents in, like summons and complaint. Now, there's a problem with some of that stuff. Is he authorized to use high-frequency radio waves? Does he possess an FCC license? I mean, I like to know these little things because I don't assume anybody has anything. Right here, that's a copy of an indictment. At least it's a purported indictment. The two attorneys that tried the case weren't authorized to practice law in the state. You hearing me? They weren't authorized to practice law in the state when they conducted the legal process. They ran a trial, put lots of people away. Not only that, there wasn't one count in 40 counts of that alleged indictment that could have been defended against because of multiplicity and duplicity. It's a piece of shit. Those people had trial by press, not trial in the courtroom. I understand that none of them were able to get a copy of the grand jury transcript. Well, that concerns me. You know, I have trouble getting them. I really do have trouble getting them. But sometimes you can get a judge to order one prepared. And the reason I like to see it is because I want to know what false testimony was given to the grand jury to obtain the probable cause known as an indictment. I like to know that. I also like to know how many grand jurors voted to indict. That's done on a concurrence form. You know, case law is quite clear, at least of what I've looked up, is if there isn't 12 grand jurors that vote to indict, there's not an indictment. There's case law where 8 showed up, 9 showed up, or signed a concurrence form. 11. What if 11 signed and not 12? No indictment. What if I find somebody lied to the grand jury, gave false testimony to obtain an indictment? Well, all I got to do is prove that the testimony, any part of it, was false, and I move to dismiss the indictment. Yeah. You see, due process of law doesn't just give the appearance. It must be. And it's your job to see to it that you do get due process of law. Don't be afraid of all that paperwork. Within it are errors that you can use. Now remember, the legal process in this country that we have, I'm here to tell you, is a good process. You're supposed to be deemed innocent until proven guilty. That's the right side of the coin, because government is terribly imperfect. And terrible mistakes are made. But you know who makes the most mistakes? The defendant, by failing to assert his rights. They make way more mistakes than the government does, by failing to properly defend themselves, by knowing the law. Don't ever assume that any police officer knows the law, any prosecutor knows the law, or any judge knows the law. You cannot assume that. They'll do what they're accustomed to doing. And oftentimes they get off the track so far that you can't even recognize what they're doing is any form of due process of law. Fake or otherwise. They get so far off the track. Because who is there out there to see to it that they live up to our contract? Us. Now the thrashing machine works the best on those who volunteer. And you know what? I'm sad to say it, but most volunteer. They just volunteer. They volunteer so much that our elected and appointed officials don't even have to bother with the constitutional rights of yours. Because the big money is taken by the volunteering. Those who walk in and plead guilty. Now I'd like to tell you a story about walking in and pleading guilty. By the way, there's several stories, so it's hard for me to pick just one. But can you imagine a prison facility in this country that has probably the smartest inmates in it? Those that rose to a high level in their fields. Extremely intelligent individuals. Well, that exists. And I had cause to visit that place. Well, let's put it this way, I was commanded to visit that place for a certain period of time. And I was amazed at the intelligence and the smartness that was there. Now visualize the smartest people in their field having pled guilty just to get the government off their back. Yeah. Their good name and reputation is gone. Their career that they specialized in is gone. And they're now away from their family and friends and under the control of those with 1/3 the intelligence of them. Now that's got to be demoralizing. But if you ever got to go anywhere, it's a fine place to go to, because it's a school of higher learning. As a matter of fact, it was a college. And now it's considered a school of higher learning. You learn much more there than you can in any college. But take a person that's extremely bright, who's convinced that he must have committed a crime and pled guilty and destroyed himself. Gave up his constitutional right to be found guilty by due process. One of the reasons, of course, is because they didn't know what due process was, and of course they had hired legal counsel. Many of them paid a lot of money. One of the fellows there spent $550,000 on legal help. And I read the transcripts in his case and he didn't get any. I mean, I read the transcript from day one through. There was doctors there, lawyers there, judges there. Are you hearing me? Yeah? All of the specialist fields, the bankers, drug enforcement agents, probation officers. I mean, they's there. So you make friends wherever you are. And whenever I make friends, I like to go to the law library. Now, and I like people that have concern about why they're there, to have at least when they're in the can the perception of comfort, you know. But when you go to the law library, you can look up the statutes. You got any idea how many people pled guilty when they weren't even charged with a criminal offense? Are you hearing me? Criminal offense? And you've got to be charged with a crime. And if you're not charged with a statute that is indeed a criminal offense, what are you doing there? You can't even plead guilty to no criminal charge. Now you want to see a dude get hot under the collar is when he looks up the criminal statutes and finds that the statute he was charged with wasn't there. And you look up the civil statutes that had a minor civil penalty to it, which he could have easily paid just a few cents in relationship to what he went through. And of course you always check the Code of Federal Regulations if you're dealing in a federal case to see if there is any authorization from the Secretary or from Congress to use that section as a criminal charge. You don't want none. Now, I'm going to tell you how important it is. It doesn't make any difference how you are in the mental ladder, whether you're in the bottom rung or the top rung of it. If you do not assert those rights, it's like putting a chunk of meat into a meat grinder and turning the crank. Mark my word, you'll come out hamburger. That's your only prayer for relief, is that. Plead guilty to no criminal charge. That's got to be the height of stupidity. And when you take a very smart individual and he sees that for himself, first thing he says is, well, why didn't my attorney know that? Well, probably because he didn't look. Probably it's just been custom in your part of the country to process people civilly and make them believe they're charged criminally. And then, of course, they look in that mirror and say, you know, I'm the dumb shit that didn't recognize that there was no criminal charge there, and I'm the dumb shit that pled guilty. Yeah, don't want to be called that. Don't start calling yourself dumb shit. You got to. Now, the best analysis. I mean, when you're in a place like that, you might as well take a look at the turf, who's all there and what they all. So I took a look at a lot of so-called indictments. Yeah. And I checked them out at the law library. And here's what I found. Now, this is going to shock you. 90% of those people, I'm talking about the very brightest in this country now, were in this facility, had never been charged with a criminal offense. Now, some had criminal statutes attached to a document marked indictment. But when they wrote the clerk of the district court and asked for a copy of the grand jury transcript, invariably the clerk would write back and say, there ain't one. Now, they'd write a second time and ask for a copy of the grand jury concurrence form signed by at least 12 grand jurors voting to indict. And guess what would happen within just a few days? They'd be out in the street. You hear me? They'd be out in the street. Free person. Good name, shot. Reputation, shot. A lot of money gone for lawyers' fees. Not even charged with a crime. Now that's sad. Nobody should be caught like that. And you don't have to be an Einstein. Just stick with this basic, simple English in this Constitution and see to it that everybody lives up to it. I'll put in another one that's a classic. It was this fella. He had spent $550,000 on a defense, and I said I read the transcript. I mean, there's a lot of spare time around there, so I read the transcripts of the case at trial, and I said, "Man, you know, you really didn't get a defense." He said, "What do you mean? I sure paid for one." I said, "Yeah, but you really didn't." He's a doctor. He's a doctor, and he didn't get a defense. I said, "Man, you better get a copy of your grand jury transcript." They said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, this document here that you showed me says indictment." Oh man, you must have had a grand jury, huh? Well, yeah, I suppose there was. You know, I said, "Well, write the judge and demand that he order the transcript prepared for the grand jury." Guess what? The judge ordered the transcript prepared. He got it. He got it. You want to talk about one dude. Now here's a mild-mannered man that's just as easygoing as man ever become on earth. Just the swellest guy. I didn't even think he had the ability to get angry. Well, when he started reading the transcript of the grand jury, did he get angry? See, he was charged with improper administration of treatment, medical treatment. And the government, in its wisdom, had created death certificates of people that are supposed to be dead. And those were introduced to the grand jury to find probable cause as to why this man should be prosecuted criminally. Well, guess what? There was 4 of those death certificates tendered that were alive and testified on his behalf at trial. Are you hearing me? Now, you could have the lights on and be alive and then be dead. But after you're dead, it's very hard for you weeks later, months later, to show up in court alive again. They falsify evidence. They create it out of thin air. And you know, we have a program that almost everybody knows about. It's called the Crime Stoppers Tip Line. This is a number where supposedly you can call and you will remain anonymous and you'll report a crime or a possible crime to law enforcement. Well, I've seen so much of that over the period of time that I've come to believe that the tip line is, one, not confidential, because they can determine which telephone it came from real quick. But also this: police officers, sheriffs and sheriff's deputies, U.S. marshals and deputy marshals actually lie sometimes. And sometimes they get caught at it on the witness stand. How are they going to get out of perjury when they get caught lying on the witness stand? Well, they had an anonymous tip on the hotline, Crime Stoppers hotline. And so they were merely operating on the basis of that anonymous tip, giving them some kind of a justification for getting caught in this lie. Really, it was developed in the first place as a back door for cops when they get caught lying. And I'll tell you one thing. Now there's a few cops that don't lie and don't put up with much lying. But the majority of them do. And you can assume that anything they've done or said is subject to question. Let's get to the truth. But the lying has gotten to be so good, and it's for what? The purpose of raising a revenue. To us, we want criminals to get due process of law. And to get, I'm not talking about the appearance of due process now, I'm talking about due process of law. We want them to get due process of law. If they don't get due process of law, they're deemed to be innocent. You know what I mean? Otherwise, our system breaks down. It don't work for anybody. And I like our system, the way it's set up. If you need to defend, better be ready. I realize You know, if your washing machine breaks down, you can get a repairman. If your telephone service goes out, you can get a repairman. And if you all of a sudden get into what you believe is charged criminally, you run for a lawyer, remember, he holds a contract. You hear me? He holds a contract. It may or may not be in your benefit. You got to see to it this is administered. They very seldom assert any constitutional right. Basically because they can't. You got to do that. And you've got to instruct them. If they don't do what you say, you can't have them around. But the responsibility of defense is yours. And I dare say with as many officers as there are running around, as many prosecutors and assistant prosecutors as there are in all levels, sooner or later, everyone that hears my voice will get prosecuted for something. Yeah. And rather than being scared of that, look forward to the opportunity, because it starts at the point of beginning. Look forward to the opportunity. I'll tell you what, you are going to get an education by going through that process. And you have a right to full due process of law, and you carry it all the way through. Now I have problems with juries. Matter of fact, I can never get a jury that'll ever rule and find me innocent, even when I'm not charged with a criminal offense. Are you hearing me? They read newspapers, they listen to the radio, and they listen to television. They know very little about the law. Very little. But they come in as jurors to the court process. Probably never been juror before. Don't know the duties of a juror. And they come in with a political belief that no matter what anybody says, if they're not knowledgeable in the law, the politics rule. Well, this guy is here, and they've charged him with something. He must be guilty or he wouldn't be here. That's their philosophy, and that's built into them. He must be guilty of something or he wouldn't be here. Oh yeah? He's just one of them numbers that they're running through the thrashing machine. You got to be objective as a juror. One of the things that I discovered was that all juries were being played a Fess Parker tape. You know, jurors are supposed to come in untampered with. I think the term is embracery, and that's supposed to influence a jury or a juror. Well, this Fess Parker tape was a classic example of tampering with juries. It was being played to all of them. Oh, there's another thing that I found that was just floored me. A fellow was over here at the district court clerk to the west here one day and asked the clerk, how do you select the jurors? Well, this happened to be a lady, and she said, well, I don't know how to select the jurors. The prosecution selects all the jurors for the jury pool. What chance does anybody have if the jurors aren't properly selected pursuant to what has been established for the clerk of court to perform? Are you hearing me? You get to choose from jurors that the prosecution has already all selected, and mark my word, they'll be the golden mean team, probably never even had a speeding ticket in a lifetime or a parking ticket. You'll also notice that there'll be several government employees on the jury panel as a whole. Well, probably because that's a ratio. But why do they always get to be foremen of the juries? I mean, we've got jury tampering in this country second to none. But it's hard to get a jury to rule. Now there's a famed case that you've all heard about, and that's the O.J. Simpson case. See, I had privilege to a little more knowledge probably than the average citizen, because I've been through this thing numerous times. And one of the things when you get to the big houses that you find is the temperament of inmates. A real criminal, I'm talking about a hard-backed, hard-nosed criminal who's been out there breaking the laws in this country, who finds himself in the process and finds himself having to serve time, is different and acts different and behaves different than a person who is innocent. A person who's absolutely innocent, knows that he didn't commit a crime, is thoroughly disgusted, thoroughly upset, can't believe he didn't get due process of law. Those that are guilty resign themselves to the fact, even though they may be scared through the process, resigns themselves to the fact to do their time, pay their debt to society, and go on with their life, whatever there is of it. But a guy who's innocent, he spends the toughest time in prison. Because deep down inside, he knows he didn't. You know, he knows he believed what he was doing was absolutely correct. Well, I saw on the tube, O.J. Simpson, when he first started the process. Shapiro brought him in. And he was there, and I'm telling you, O.J. Simpson was thoroughly, completely, 100% disgusted. And I knew exactly what that meant. He meant, how can they do this to me? They're ruining my good name and reputation. How can they do this to me? I didn't do it. And so he was so distraught with that. I knew right then and there he didn't do it. But you know, 80% of the people in this country today believe he did. Because they didn't know how people act when they're guilty or when they're innocent. They didn't know. But you know what floored me? I watched it. I believed all through the process that O.J. Simpson was indicted. That was capital murder. He was supposed to have been charged with. And I was floored when the verdict was read. Innocent of count 1 of the information. Innocent count 2 of the information. He was never indicted. They tried to get an indictment. They didn't have enough evidence to indict him. Man, now here's a guy that spent more than $5 million to get a defense when no plea should have been answered until he got an indictment. A plea was entered without an indictment. Oh, could he waive his right to indictment? Yeah. But you see, under the Fifth Amendment, you can't be twice held. And that refers to being indicted. He was tried a second time, wasn't he? You see, when you waive your right to an indictment on a capital offense, it may not be the end of it. You have to invoke the Fifth Amendment. He had a right to an indictment, and there was none there. So in reality, he wasn't charged. But he accepted whatever it was they did do, and it cost him a bloody fortune almost all of his life. I know from the process and watching what was proven by the defense attorney that they did provide reasonable doubt. No question about that. And under our standard of law, the man's innocent. And you need to know what the law is so that you will know, and not hold it against somebody who has been, been charged, and majority of the people find to be so wrong that he thwarted the system and so forth. No, he was lucky he got the lawyers he did when it was time to put on the argument of facts, because he waived all his rights under the law. Man, remember this in the process. Got to wash your hands in law before you can try the facts. He just waived his rights under the law and went right to the argument of facts and almost got himself in. Remember, this stuff has to be done legally and properly up front. And you got to insist that they do, or dismiss. I mean, you got to put it on the record. Hey, they didn't do this and they didn't do that. And no. Till I get an indictment, it won't answer a charge by pleading not guilty or guilty. Don't do it. Be sure that you're charged. And be sure that the people charging are qualified. Be sure that they didn't lie. You see, we have all kinds of goodies in the law to protect against these abuses of prosecution. And they abuse every day, so it's just rank and file for them. They just do it. They feel it's their job. They get a conviction fine, and for the few that manage to, they call worm their way out of it, well, that's just part of doing business. It's just those few that get free. Now, don't ever assume that anybody standing there is guilty of anything till he's had due process of law and you sit in judgment. Then you got to make the old hard decision. Near as I can tell in my readings, I find that the jury can judge the law and the fact. But the courts are telling the jurors that the judge will determine what the law is, and they're only to try the facts. Well, that's disjointed, because if you don't know the law, you don't know how to apply the facts. And so we have two kinds of trials in this country, in my belief. And that is, we have trial by judge, and we got trial by judge. The juries are nullified with embracery, both by the press and by these tapes that they're showing, and the way they're selected. You see, I want a good jury when I get a jury. I want a good jury. I want some average people. I want some above average. I want some below average. I want some nuts and I want some flakes on my jury. I want some color on my jury. Native American, African descent, Spanish descent. I mean, I want some of that on my jury, because I relate to these people. I even want a farmer on my jury. Yeah. Really, I guess I'm entitled to all farmers on my jury. But they know no more about the law than any other juror, a potential juror. I want a jury properly selected pursuant to the code. I believe it's Title 28, United States Code, 1860 to 1868, something like that. Don't hold me to those numbers, I'll have to look them up again. I am entitled to the Brady Act. That's discovery of the clerk and how all of those selections were taking place. I'm entitled to the Jinx Act. Full discovery of everything the prosecution's got. I am entitled to a Franks hearing if I question that the grand jury may have been lied to. The reason I'm entitled to a Frank's hearing is I'm entitled to that grand jury transcript and the concurrence form. I want to be sure that nobody lied. Yeah, because those are all good grounds to dismiss. Now, whether you're guilty of something or not is immaterial. You got to be charged by due process of law. Otherwise, you're deemed to be innocent as a matter of law. That's awful important. Now, at this facility in the state of North Dakota, the warden at that time was a big fella, nice looking fella, and he was a student in the law himself. And of course that's kind of the best warden to have, somebody who's a student in the law. He taught classes at Bismarck College in the evenings. And once a week he took time out to speak to the new recruits to the establishment. And he told them that he knew about the law and that he was going to enforce the rules and so on and so forth. But he was also told them that he, in a period of time, took a look at all of the cases that he had for inmates at that particular time to see. Because he said, you know, I suspected that there's got to be some that are incarcerated that are innocent. And everybody ought to suspect that. Because the system is too imperfect. The law is good, and the process is good if everyone follows it, but the problem is that they don't. And that's what you got to see to if they do. And he come to this determination, and he told everyone what he found. He said, taking that 580 that he had at that particular time, he found that 74% of the inmates at that particular time had no business being there. This is a warden who knows the law. And he said 26% of you are here for a good reason. And for those of you that are here on that basis, actually haven't committed a crime and actually been received something close to due process, you're going to have to do something. Otherwise, you're going to spend your time here. You're going to have to try, many of you can, by chemical adjustment, straighten yourself out. Some of you with some mental help to straighten yourself up. And he said, if you cooperate and you spend the amount of time necessary to rehabilitate yourself, he said, I'm a great believer in rehabilitation. And you cooperate and you try to improve yourself and get yourself fit to be out in the street. He said, I want you to know I had nothing to do with you getting here. But I have everything to do with how long you stay. He said that to the other 74% too. He said, I had nothing to do with you getting here. But he said, I have everything to do with how long you stay. You know, he ran a prison where everybody liked him. Kind of unusual. But he knew the law. He knew who committed a crime and who hadn't. He knew who got due process and who didn't. And he was liked because of his knowledge. And he was respected. I saw rehabilitation taking place on a large scale. Running prisons to just abuse is no value to the economy, And it's a waste of a resource. A lot of these people have already been educated, capable of doing lots of good things in the economy and for others. And when they're properly directed and properly resolved to the fact that that's what they're going to do, believe you me, the administration, it doesn't take them very long to figure that out. And they do what is necessary to see to it that these people get put out, piece by the time, into society. Those that are charged with capital crimes are always under the thumb for as long as they live. But they're out there to produce. Are there reoccurrences back in? Yeah. But there was the fewest reoccurrences there probably was anywhere else that I saw. That's the way to run it. That's the way it should be. And the system has a long ways to go to get to do that. In federal facilities right now, nearest numbers that I could come up with at the time, and this is now a few years old already, it cost $560 a day to keep an inmate. Now, if you're running 90% innocent or not charged with a crime, what a waste of taxpayers' money. Also, it's a waste of the taxpayers' money that the individual inmate is responsible for, too. If he didn't assert his rights and see them all the way through. That's his fault. And he's got to recognize his responsibility on that. But for those that did everything they could, they have no business being there. And I'd like to see a system where we had knowledgeable people in the law roam these prisons and seek out these people that weren't charged with a crime, weren't prosecuted pursuant to due process of law, and determine whether they're a danger to society or not and put them out in the street. Because there's so many people falling through the cracks, getting in the can and getting destroyed. And the system is just the way it's being run right now is too imperfect. Because the people running it are that imperfect. They're only interested in maintaining a 100% conviction rate. Whether you're guilty or not, they don't care. And prosecutors in this country are charged with the responsibility of not only fighting for prosecution and conviction, but also fighting for innocence. If they got the evidence or suspect that he's innocent. But they're not doing that job. But they're charged with that responsibility also. And they took an oath. If we get it back to that oath, and only we the people, remember, we the people hold this contract. We got it. Back in the early days, this was prepared, and it was given to government and said, now government, you can govern only when you abide by this. This is our contract. You must sign to accept the responsibility. And for those that come after you, you must take the oath of office to uphold this Constitution. So the generations as they go by will be bound to this document. You must do this or you cannot govern. We will not let you administer this contract. So you see, we're the contractors. They're the contractees. You know the scenario, employer, employee. They're our contractees. And they've all sworn to uphold this. And if they haven't, they're not entitled to their check because they're impersonating an official. So sometimes you got to check to see if they've signed an oath of office. And the law is quite clear as I read it. You know, this is my interpretation of it. That if they don't sign that oath of office before they take the office, they perjured themselves. They're impersonating officials. Now there's a town here to the west of us. We just kind of take a look at them to see what was going on there. Because it didn't seem like anybody could recognize any constitution being administered. Guess what? Not a single official had ever taken or signed an oath of office. Oh, what? What were they doing receiving a check then from the treasurer? They're not entitled to pay when you're impersonating an official. Well, it got brought to their attention and they signed those oaths of office after the fact. But to tell you the truth, they were charged with responsibility before they took the office. So any time between then and when they finally signed one, most definitely anything criminal that they prepared or charged or did was of no force and effect as a matter of law. In other words, don't assume anything. If they say it's this way and that way, you say, I think not. Make them prove it. Don't believe their credentials? Make them prove it. Don't assume they took an oath. Let's find out. Those are a record with the auditors and with the Secretary of State. And, I mean, there's around. Then we have a whole tier of courts in this country. And the Constitution makes it real clear there shall be but one court, and that be the Supreme Court, and such inferior courts. Those are all courts of lesser authority than the Supreme Court of the United States. And that goes right into the states. It goes right on down to courts of no record. In the state of North Dakota, there are municipal courts. These are courts that have been predominantly set up by the municipality for the purpose of the sheep shearing contest, collect money from the public. It's for the purpose of raising a revenue, and it's a court of no record. There's no record being taken. And one can go through that whole process and assert its rights to the best of his ability and use it for practice because it's a court of no record. They even have jury trials in their courts of no record. No record means it don't exist. It is a dog and pony show to get you to agree to pay. I mean, it is a program. There's people walk in there by the hundreds, by the thousands that believe it's a court. Nobody's taken any oath of office. Don't exist. We used to in this state have county courts, and I liked them because you could get the law enforced there. Now you've got district courts, basically contract courts. But if you're sharp, you can enforce the contract. This one. You got to kind of know what you're doing. You got to be willing to stand up. People give up most of their rights because they are afraid of jail. I've been there numerous times. There's nothing to be afraid of. Yeah. And if you're scared of going to jail, go visit one. Go visit one anywhere. Go through it. They'll take you through the jail, show you, so that you aren't quite so shocked if the doors start slamming and you get left alone someplace where you're isolated and so on and so forth. If the threat of jail lets any of us give up our constitutional rights, you have no rights. If that's how weak you are, you have no rights. Well, I don't want to go to jail, so I'll give up this. Well, if you give up some freedom, some of the freedoms of yours for a little liberty, you deserve neither freedom nor liberty. Now, our forefathers have said that, so I'm just quoting them. You're charged with that responsibility as a citizen of this country to know the law, and ignorance of the law is no excuse. My definition of organized crime fits lots of areas. Right now, it fits very well on the alleged criminal process system. For the purpose of raising a revenue. And whether they get money out of you, whether they get it out of the taxpayers because you are incarcerated. You see? Those are all trust funds, and they got to justify them. And it's for the purpose of them getting a revenue for themselves. How can they support a jail without having it full of inmates? Believe you me, check around the country. Most of them is full, and many of them are over full. They're really generating big bucks. One of the fastest industries in America today is the construction of prisons and jails. That's sad. Right now, we've got 1 out of every 100 persons. Some are followed. And even if the most conservative estimate of 30% innocence in there, can you imagine how much that affects how many people and how many people's lives? But I'm telling you, and I haven't been in all the facilities yet. There is a lot of innocence in jail. As a matter of fact, there is such a high percentage, based on my perception now, that you can assume that a person in jail is innocent, and you'll be right more than 50% of the time. Not only do they have to be charged in the due process of law, they also have to be charged with the crime they did. You hear me? They have to be charged with the crime that they actually did. See, many people that have done things that aren't legal. Sometimes a fictitious crime will be structured. All false. To give the total appearance that a crime was committed a block or 2 blocks away from where this person was at a particular period of time. And he'll be charged with that. Well, he has a right to see what evidence was given the grand jury. He also has these rights, the same as any innocent person. He has them all. And it's his duty to assert them. Because he's entitled to be charged with a crime he actually did, not one he didn't do. There are classic examples of that. Liberty and freedom are in having the basic common sense of law. If you possess that, and if you possess some basic knowledge as to how to assert your rights all the way through the process and question everything that the other side is doing, you will really start to live the American dream. You won't be so afraid of government. You won't be so afraid of enforcement people, let's put it that way. Because I say law enforcement people are misnomers because they can't enforce what they don't know anything about. You'll start to live free, unscared, and unworried. And that's important. It doesn't make any difference how rich or how poor you are. The feeling of freedom, the feeling of having knowledge to protect yourself. You don't have to have the guns to protect yourself, but you must have knowledge. Maybe the day will come when you need to exercise that Second Amendment fully. Maybe. But you must possess that knowledge to really be free. So that's why I say, hey, study. Maybe you watch one last football game a week, or go to the saloon one last time a month or whatever, but take the time to look in to what your rights are, so that you can become very fluent with them. So that when adversity hits you, you can take it like cool man Luke and go through the process and wave nothing. I went through a whole complete process in the federal system one time without signing my name one time. Not one. See, signing is volunteering. Waiving of rights. Didn't do so. And I did that for a reason. I was not charged with a criminal offense. Yeah. When I've been in the big houses both times, I was not charged with a criminal offense. Hear me? The second time it happened, I was halfway through trial before I realized there wasn't a criminal charge there. Well, that's a little late. That's my fault. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know that there wasn't a criminal offense there. You see, the Code of Federal Regulations was lacking, authorizing that section of the law to be used criminally. And I was busy, you know, trying to maintain and prepare a defense and that type of thing, and overlooked the obvious. See, they had tried numerous times charging me, or at least giving the appearance that they charged me with criminal statutes. And all of those I was able to prevail on. Because there wasn't any. I mean, I hadn't committed the crime. But there is a lot of political prosecutions in this country. A lot of people are in prison because of their political beliefs. And it's deemed by the government as, how dare you defy us with this? Oh yeah? Well, they lost track of the fact that they're the ones that got to uphold this. Under oath, they give their affirmation to it. I'm just asserting it. How dare you stand up for your rights? Well, I dare. And when you dare enough to stand up for your rights, they'll leave you alone. Until then, they'll just keep milking this machine left and right. I mean, you know, the cows used to come home every night and they'd put the milking machine on them. The thrashing machine still runs. You get blown in the pile. And so you got to do this. You don't have to have done anything wrong. But even if you did, it's their obligation to prove it. You hear me? It's their obligation. That's our system. If you don't believe in our system, then we don't have one. Yeah. But I do believe in this system. I just want to be everybody else to live up to it. Now, there's lots about it I don't know. It's a continuing education as long as you live. Farmers are deemed to be in a lot of trouble right now. I want them to know that, hey, been through that. But there's no excuse for laying down and walking away. The American economy is at stake. People getting fed is at stake. And you're not going to get anyone to assert your rights under those contracts but yourself. And so you can't look elsewhere. And you might feel the most inadequate person of all. I mean, I have. I felt so inadequate when I looked in the mirror, I just said, oh my goodness, I'll never be able to grasp this. When you get to the inside of the law, it is very simple. It is very clear. Now to try to sum this up some. I keep repeating this. Watch what you do with this. I've been arrested a few times. Hauled in. They've taken whatever I had on me away from me. And then they put a pen out there and they said, here, sign here. And I said, well, look, you took it. I didn't give it to you. You took it. Yeah, well, sign here. Yeah. Then when you leave the establishment, they say, well, here's your things. Sign here. No. Well, you got to sign here. We're not going to give them to you. I said, look, I didn't sign authorizing you to take them, and I'm not going to sign and let you off the hook giving them back. You took them. You took them without my permission. You can give them back without my permission. You don't have to sign nothing. Now here's the complaint. Sign your own complaint. That's one of the oldest tricks in the book. Serve yourself the summons and complaint. What? No, I want somebody who is authorized to practice law to sign the complaint, because I can hold him to his job. You see, if he's a lawyer, he's a member of the Bar Association. They're supposed to be. In most cases they are. If I got a problem with him doing his job as a lawyer, I can turn him in under a lawyer professional responsibility complaint and have him investigated. And that don't cost me no money. I mean, the stamp to go to the Secretary of the Supreme Court, that's no big cost. If he's a judge sitting on the bench and he doesn't uphold his oath of office, if he denies me my rights to due process anywhere along the line, ka-zip to the Judicial Conduct Commission. Nothing else, perjury of oath. Hold them to their job. There's others that'll investigate them. Oh, a lot of the times it's rubber stamped. But I'm going to tell you something. When you've got an official that's not complying with his oath of office, the stack of complaints start to increase. And when the file gets so thick, you'll find that he's just not a judicial officer anymore. Or you'll find that he's no longer authorized to practice law anymore. Now that happens. It truly does. One judge one day accused me of being instrumental in tripling and quadrupling the malpractice insurance coverage for the legal profession. Well, I've never been praised so much in my life. It was not earned, but I was given that praise anyway. Yeah, this is important. There's lots of things to do out there to bring about a better system, not in its design so much as in getting people to adhere to the law. I find no bigger criminals than those that work within government and have authority. I find that they dwarf whatever I've seen in the big houses. That's right. They dwarf. This may shock you. Whatever education I got, it's my educated opinion that 60% of the trafficking in controlled substance within the United States of America is done within, of, and by government. That's a tremendous volume. Case after case of setting up innocent people to take the fall just to keep the prosecution numbers up, to keep the notches in the gun belt. The most unpopular people that I've ever seen inside of a big house has been a drug enforcement agent. They're the most unpopular. Then bankers are next most unpopular. And the rest are, just good old guys. It is interesting, the people in the backgrounds you meet in facilities like that. Many people get terribly shook up in that legal process. And I'd like to give you one more story before we crank this up. I was out harvesting one day, running a combine, and I was harvesting the grain that I had planted. I was accosted that day by 6 deputy sheriffs, without, of course, any paperwork, because they still hadn't learned anything. And they secured control of the combine, and of course they don't know how to run a combine either, and they ran it in the ditch and smashed it all to hell. But they did it anyway. And I kept asking them for their warrant. I kept asking them for their documentation. And meanwhile, I wasn't going to volunteer because it was my right to harvest what I planted. The law is all based on that. And I had been farming the land for some 30 years. And was authorized to do so. Anyway, I was beaten on for about, near as I can tell now. I didn't have time to look at my watch. When somebody's beating the hell out of you, you don't take the time to watch. But I figure about 40 minutes. And finally I was being rendered into a condition of the lights had gone out. In other words, all I had was the fuzz on the TV. I could make out nobody anymore. And of course after that you start weakening. I wasn't going to volunteer myself out of the combine cab. And of course there was 3 of them in this combine cab just beating the hell out of me. And I guess I was thrown from the combine head first into a ditch and hauled away. Well, I was prosecuted for theft and attempted theft, and it was deemed to be a felony, and there was no indictment, and they just ran the process, and they had a hand-picked jury, and the jury found me guilty. And the judge was a classmate of mine. And so I had no choice, but to make the record in court. That's all I could do. And made the record pretty good. Best we could do anyway, with what we had available to us. And when they are found guilty, you are secured into controlled environment immediately, and you go back for sentencing. Now, sentencing is the judgment. And so I was sentenced to consecutive terms, not concurrent, consecutive, which totaled, based on my learning of math, to 20 years. And eventually I was transferred out to Bismarck to participate in that big house out there. And of course you are interviewed as to how big a criminal you are, whether you should be held in maximum security or minimum security. And of course I was sentenced to the state farm. But you still have to go through this committee. And they said, well, are you feel remorseful for the crime you committed? I said, I didn't commit one. Well, you're here. I said, yeah, I don't doubt that. I mean, I'm here, but I didn't commit a crime. And I wasn't charged with one. Now, how can that be? Well, I said, I'm telling you the way it is. You want to look at the case? You look at the case. Well, I was put out to State Farm. And thinking that the judge knew that he made an error in such a heavy sentence, I made what was called a Rule 35 motion. It's a motion that's made within 120 days of judgment. And you'll find it in the criminal rules. And you can request the judge for certain reasons that you feel are fitting and proper for him to reduce the sentence. So I did that, and the judge decided he was going to transport me all the way back and go before him again, and he was going to deny it. And he did. He denied it. Denied my Rule 35 to modify sentence to reduce it. Well, that's a process that I have a right to, and of course I exercise it. There's also another process, and that's the right to parole. So I got before the parole board as soon as could possibly be done, and there happened to be two attorneys. They were both ladies sitting on that parole board. And, I put my pitch in writing, and I was there in person, and one of the parole board members was a farmer. And the two ladies said, Ron, where's the crime here? I said, that's just it, ma'am. There isn't one. Well, the farmer on the parole board said, well, you must have done something wrong, because I've been out running my combine every year, and I was never accosted by sheriff's deputies, and charged with a crime of theft and attempted theft. And I said, well, your day is coming. I said, I didn't ever expect that to happen either. I said, it's the way it is. And I said, that's what they did. And I said, they committed the crime. They stole the grain. And they authorized the harvesting of the grain and the conversion of that grain through the elevator system for personal profit. They authorized that. I said, they even took grain from the other side of the road, which they weren't even allegedly contesting, but they sold that too. Well, the vote on the parole board was, get him out of here. There's no crime. So I signed a contract then to get out. And I was under the authority of a parole officer. Well, I prepared and filed my own appeal, and went before the Supreme Court of North Dakota and argued my appeal. It took the court 4 months to render its opinion, and they acquitted me. I was acquitted, but still spent 7.5 months in a facility. I guess that's the price you pay in America for the system that we have. My family was terribly disappointed at that. While I was gone, a lot of stealing took place, which was the reason for the prosecution in the first place. Remember, prosecute the victim. That happens more times than anyone would want to believe, and even makes you a little sick inside. And they get away with it with impunity. They allege immunity from prosecution. They allege it, but they don't have immunity when they break the law, violate their oath of office. And so remedy is always forthcoming eventually. Your rights are yours. You must declare them. Failure to do so, my opinion, you're a second-class citizen. I know lots of first-class citizens that hold up their rights and stand for them regardless of what takes place. And if it wasn't for all of them, none of us would have any rights. Assert them. Remember this. These they give away. So you can have a copy of it. Read it. It's so important for your feeling of well-being. And don't be afraid of these people. There's nothing to be afraid of. Thank you very much. God bless you.